in the passage. And the second thing we see is we need power to sustain us. We see Jonathan come to David at Horesh, but he can't run against Saul and an army by himself. He can't go fix David's situation. But what he can do is he can bring David to the source of power and the source of control and the source of strength. And he can tell him, David, don't give up, look up. And it says that Jonathan helped him find strength in God. Now, I don't know what Jonathan did with David. I can make some reasonable assumptions, right? I bet since they knew each other and they both knew God, that there was a little reminding going on in the situation where Jonathan would say, David, God is in control of this situation. My dad is not. God has made you promises that he's going to keep. He never doesn't keep his promises. And we're going to pray together and we're going to believe God together that there is a purpose in this and we're going to get through it. And I thought, man, isn't that what we all need? Because even though in the situation, Jonathan went to David, at the end of the passage we see David remained in the storm while Jonathan pulled out. And see, David has to manage the storm alone. Isn't that true? You can have people who walk with you, but they come in and out. But then you're left with your head on the pillow at night going, oh boy, what do I do? And at that moment, that's where you need the inner resources, the inner power, and the availability of power to come into your situation. In the Bible, in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9, it's up on the screen. We have another storm situation in the Bible. It's the Apostle Paul, and he has prayed 3 times for God to take away his storm. And then he clues us into God's response to his request for relief. Each time he said, my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. So now I am glad to boast about my weakness so that the power of Christ can work through me. Isn't it interesting that at the peak of the storm, at the peak of helplessness, and potentially hopelessness is the exact moment when God's power can come in. Why? Because there is a level of humility that the storm brings us to, isn't it? Where we run out of solutions on our own, our self-sufficiency in the storm isn't quite cutting it, and trusting in ourselves in the middle of the storms isn't quite cutting it. Things still seem to be fragmenting, and sometimes God lets us get to the end of ourselves, so when we are ready to give up, all we have left is to look up. And that's what the Apostle Paul says. And in humility, which is the opposite of pride, and in faith, which is the opposite of self-sufficiency, he turns to God, and that is the moment when God's power can fully come into your life, in that place of humility and of faith. God loves to invest that moment with power. So he tells Paul, my power works best in weakness. And then Paul gets it. He says, oh, so the more I confess my weakness, the more power I get from you? Okay, I get it. That's what I'm going to do.